Happy Friday, everyone. It's a hot summer day here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon. Before we get started, let's take a look at today's highlights. Sentiment among manufacturers rebounds in July, gradually recovering from the MERS outbreak. The industrial output also ticks up. Is recovery in sight? We get a closer look at what's making headlines in global business news. The U.S. sees growth pick up in the second quarter, while Japan falls short again of its inflation target. These stories and more coming right up. Some positive economic figures have been released on this final day of July, giving rise to some hope that the country is recovering from the recent MERS outbreak. But as our Kwon So-ah reports, it might be too early to tell.
Korean manufacturers were more positive in July compared to the month before, when the MERS outbreak and sluggish exports dragged sentiment to a 6-year low. The Bank of Korea said Friday that its business survey index for July rose to 70, 4 points higher than June, and the first on-month rise in 3 months. The forecast for August also stands at 70. The central bank attributes the uptick to Korea's gradual recovery from the MERS outbreak and growing expectations for exports. However, the index is lower than the corresponding figures for April and May, an indication that businesses are still suffering from the consequences of the outbreak. A reading below 100 indicates that pessimists outnumber optimists. In a different report released by Statistics Korea Friday, the nation's industrial output rebounded for the first time in 4 months in June, as it inched up 0.5%. This is mainly due to greater production in the mining and manufacturing sectors, as well as increased demand for refined petroleum and machinery equipment products.
A high base effect and more operating days contributed to the rebound in those sectors. But the concern lies in the service sector and consumption, which dropped even lower than in the same month last year.
In fact, retail sales plunged by 3.7% from the month before. That's much greater than the 0.8% drop in April last year after the Seoul ferry accident. This is why experts say that economic indicators in July and August will become the key factors in determining whether Korea is on a clear path towards recovery or if the effects of the MERS outbreak will continue to linger. Kwon So-ah, Business Daily.
Korea has issued acceptance of the World Trade Organization's historic $1 trillion trade deal, making it the 9th out of the 161 WTO members to do so. 8 other members, including the U.S., Hong Kong, and Singapore, have also secured acceptance of the Trade Facilitation Agreement, concluded in December 2013. The TFA, the first and most comprehensive multilateral agreement to be concluded since the WTO's inception 20 years ago, aims to eliminate red tape and custom barriers for goods shipped worldwide. The agreement does not enter into force until ratified by 2/3 of the membership. The International Chamber of Commerce forecasts that the agreement will unlock a potential of over $1 trillion in global economic value and create at least 21 million new jobs. While Korean farmers raked in the highest level in income last year, they saw profitability plunge due to the rising cost of management. The National Assembly Research Service said the profit margin on farms tumbled to a record low of 32%, down 0.7 percentage points on year, despite the total income per farm reaching roughly $28,000, up 5% from the year before. Now, this is tied to the overall cost of management, especially in care of livestock, rent, and pesticides, which went up roughly 6% from the previous year to an average of $19,000. It's summer and it's sweltering hot, and this kind of weather for many will mean wrapping up the week with a cool, refreshing beer. But what's different this summer is that more Koreans are choosing import beers over local brands. Here's our Lee Ju-young with more.
After a long day's at work, a lot of people like to wrap up the day with a drink or two. Different types of alcoholic drinks fill up the table, but one of the most popular options these days is import beer. From European to Asian brands, beers from all over the world can be found in restaurants as well as in many supermarkets nowadays, including at E-Mart, the country's biggest big box store. E-Mart sales of imported beer jumped to around $32 million from January to July, up roughly 20% from the year before. This accounts for nearly 40% of total beer sales so far this year. The wide variety of import beer has opened up more options for consumers. Compared to the 50 domestic beer options, as many as 200 foreign beers are available at stores, with brands from Europe, Japan, and China being the most popular. With the surge in popularity, large retail chains are even planning to offer gift set options for import beers. But experts say, despite the rise in popularity of foreign brands, Korean beers will, for the time being, hold on to their dominance in the market. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
Korea's Samsung Electronics is teaming up with MasterCard to bring its mobile payment system to Europe later this year, speeding up efforts to gain a competitive edge against rivals. According to industry sources, Samsung recently agreed with MasterCard to work together to commercialize a Samsung Pay service in Europe by year-end. The mobile payment option is expected to rival Apple Pay, which launched in the UK this month. MasterCard's competitor Visa has already announced that it will partner with Google's Android Pay in Europe. Samsung is currently running trial phases of its mobile wallet in Korea and is set to launch officially in the country and the U.S. later this summer. It's the time of the year when fears of power shortages emerge here in Korea. So the country's electricity operator is stepping up efforts to advance the new renewable energy sector. Our Park Se-young tells us more.
What you're looking at is a comprehensive facility testing the combustion process of potential biofuel materials. A research center under the state-run Korea Electric Power Corporation can now determine how to utilize new renewable energy materials such as industrial waste and even coffee byproducts more efficiently.
Some of the materials can cause fatal damages to the boiler, but this equipment can test how such damages could be prevented, as well as whether the materials are suitable to be used as biofuels.
The new renewable energy sector is garnering more attention as experts continue to emphasize the importance of developing new alternative energy sources other than solar and wind power. Researchers say testing many different types of construction and industrial waste products will aid in developing eco-friendly methods of reducing carbon dioxide.
For a country like Korea, which lacks resources that can reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, combusting such materials will become a new technology and prevent national assets from going to waste.
With the establishment of the new testing facility, hopes are high that these technologies will help reduce fuel costs and better prepare for climate change. Park Se-young, Business Daily.
And now let's see how the markets fared here in Seoul today. Seoul shares ended higher on this Friday. Although they started weak, they trimmed their losses as investors hunted for bargains and gobbled up telecoms and other blue chips. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi rose 0.55% to finish at 2030.16. While the tech-heavy Kosdaq also gained 1.71% to end at 725.06. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency hit a 3-year low against the greenback, ending at 1,171. Second quarter GDP figures for the United States are out. So, did the world's largest economy show better momentum for growth? And what impact could this latest report have on a potential Fed rate hike later this year? Let's get a closer look with our Eunice Kim in the studio. Hello, Eunice.
Hello, Jian.
All right, so I see that these second quarter figures are looking better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we are still gaining momentum in the States. The U.S. Commerce Department did say that America's economy was still expanding in the second quarter by an annual rate of 2.3% in the second quarter. This is slightly below expectations, though. Let's first take a look at how the markets reacted to this development. Now, over in Wall Street, the Dow Jones ended Thursday's trading day relatively flat at -0.3% following news of that modest growth in Q2. The Kospi ended up today, as you heard, after having dipped slightly on Thursday on disappointing Q2 corporate earnings. The Shanghai Composite is still swinging, and the Nikkei also ended up after clawing back 1% on Thursday when the Fed failed to give a clear guidance on its much anticipated rate hike.
All right, so then how do we expect the GDP growth figure to affect the Fed's decision on when to raise its funds rate?
Yeah, that is the big question right now, isn't it? That everybody is mulling over exactly when. After Thursday's monetary policy statement, market watchers were split on whether that rate hike, which would be the first in nearly 10 years, will come in the next FOMC meeting for a September application or later in the year for December. Now, the Fed had said it needed, quote, some further improvement in jobs and, quote, reasonable confidence that inflation was moving back toward the 2% target. But after the release of the GDP numbers, more appear to sway toward sooner than later.
I think this report certainly keeps the Fed on track for a rate hike later this year. We are saying September. We think the data in terms of the GDP print today and consumption in particular, the PCE inflation report next week, and employment will all be enough to get the Fed to move in September.
And jobs were improving in Q2, and a bump up in GDP was significantly helped by consumer spending, which rose to an annualized near 3% compared to a 1.8% gain in the first quarter, though paychecks still had a ways to catch up, earnings coming in at a gain of 1.5% after taxes. This was enough to offset cuts in business investment, which was the worst since the third quarter of 2012, and also the deep losses in energy, which we already know so well. Brent crude on its way for a third straight month of decline that prompted global oil company Shell to announce yesterday that it would cut 6,500 jobs by the year's end amid dropping profits.
Wow, and also many of Korean companies posted lower than expected profits for the second quarter. But coming back to GDP figures for the U.S., I did notice that there was a change in the first quarter calculations.
Yeah, good catch. In fact, the downward arrow was revised to an upward arrow for the first quarter GDP. It was revised to 0.6% gain, despite, you'll remember, challenging winter weather in the beginning of the year. That wasn't the only revision, though. The U.S. Commerce Department did go back 3 years and reissued growth figures from 2012 through 2014. And looking at them by quarterly averages, you'll see economic expansion was not as robust as was previously projected, a scenario the central bank will have to consider as well as they ponder, again, back to that question, when to raise that key interest rate.
All right, well, let's move on to what's happening in Japan. Despite the country's efforts to get the economy going, the new figures show that this progress of recovery is quite slow.
Yeah, it's an upward climb, unfortunately. The Bank of Japan, of course, has been trying to raise the inflation rate to also a 2% target here, but deflation concerns are stubbornly lingering. According to data released by Japan's Statistics Bureau earlier on this Friday, household spending rose slightly by 0.6% in June, that is excluding fresh food and energy costs. Meanwhile, a separate government report said household spending actually dropped by 2% on year. This despite a rise in May at 4.8%. This is when Japan saw double-digit growth in spending for housing, household products, apparel, and real estate. So it is back on trend with a decline logged in 14 of the 15 past months, unfortunately.
Right, that's disheartening. But any news on jobs?
Well, on jobs, more bad news here too, unfortunately. The unemployment rate did worse than analysts had projected, rising to 3.4% from the month before. And while Bank of Japan Governor Haruhiko Kuroda had said he doesn't expect to reach that 2% inflation target until the 6 months leading up to September of next year, a lot of analysts say they will need to do more than that in addition to more monetary stimulus.
All right, perhaps we'll see Japan's monetary policymakers revisiting their strategy.
Perhaps.
All right, well, you have one more story for us on a much lighter note. I hear that there's a new feature that Google has put forth for people using Gmail.
Right. If you are one of the 900 million Gmail users out there, Gmail has a new feature for you. You can now put a self-destruct option on your emails. Kind of like Snapchat for email. Now, it does require that you have the Chrome browser and the Dmail extension downloaded. You can use Dmail right from your usual email writing window, where it will offer you choices for self-destructing timeframes in 1 hour, in 1 day, or in 1 week, as you see there. But those who have used it, note two things. If the recipient of your Dmail doesn't have Dmail installed, they will have to access your email through a link. We know how a lot of people don't like to do that. And apparently it does leave a mark behind even after it has self-destructed.
Well, I think it's a little bit inconvenient that people that you send the emails to also need to have that Dmail installed.
Right.
And also, I don't know if people are going to like receiving self-destructive mails.
Having a deadline on when you can read it.
Okay, but we'll have to see how popular this thing gets.
And how Google will change it as well.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much for coming in today, Eunice.
You bet.
All right. That's all I have for you today. Hope we are able to walk you through the week with business stories that matter to you. We'll be back next week with more, so don't forget to check back with us then. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend, everyone.